Hello, this is Claus Jensen presenting one of my recent games played on ICCF. My opponent in this game was rated almost 2300 and he chose the Sicilian defense against my 1e4, so e4, c5, knight f3, and now he played the classical second move for black in the Sicilian, knight c6. And I chose not to play a classical Sicilian with d4, and instead I went for the Rossolimo variation with bishop b5. Here black could play e6, but he chose the most popular way to develop the bishop, g6. Now I played bishop takes c6, and it may seem illogical to spend two bishop moves only to trade it off for the knight. But it is of course a perfectly plausible line, which is actually quite popular amongst players like Shirov, Ivanchuk, and even Carlsen has played it on several occasions. Earlier on it was Michael Adams. Many players have played this variation. And the idea is that black's pawn structure is compromised early on, and he has to make a decision whether to recapture with the b pawn or the d pawn. And although white has spent two moves with the bishop, it has removed the good knight, which by the way was developed already, so the loss of tempo is not that important. And white has also prepared a quick short castle if he wants to do so. In our youth, we were told to capture towards the center, b takes c6, but nowadays d takes c6 is the more popular move. But the advantage of recapturing with the b pawn is that it gives black more central control and the option d5. One of the drawbacks is that his development is a little bit awkward after, for example, castles, bishop g7, rook e1. Now he cannot really play knight f6 because of the annoying e5, knight d5, c4, knight c7. It's a bit awkward for black here. And if instead he tries, instead of knight f6, tries d6, then e5 is actually very strong. So that's some of the problems with b takes c6. So in the game, my opponent played d takes c6, the normal move. d3, bishop g7, h3, knight f6, knight c3. It's a very flexible position for white here. If castles here, bishop e3, b6, this could be a line, queen d2, e5, then white cannot take on e5 because of knight takes e4, but then he will simply play bishop h6 and trade off the dark squared bishop, which is almost always a good idea for white in these positions. So instead, my opponent went knight d7, planning knight f8, knight e6, e5. As we shall see now, bishop e3 came, e5, queen d2. And this is of course giving white the option of playing bishop to h6 to swap out this the dark squared bishop, and it also opens up the possibility of castling queenside instead of kingside. Both options are available to white at this point. Now comes h6, which is the only move for black to keep his dark squared bishop on the board, but it is at the cost of castling kingside, because castling kingside is not possible right now because the h6 pawn would be hanging. I castled kingside, and queen e7 came, and white is clearly ahead in development, but the position is quite slow, and black is spending quite a few moves on rearranging. And possible white plans are either to play for the f4 break, which perhaps is not that attractive, because after f4, e takes f4, then the black bishop is again quite strong. But the alternative is to play on the queen side, play a3, b4, Michael Adams has tried this in a previous game, but I went for the f4 plan, knight h2. Black continued his plans of rearranging, and then came f4. E takes f4, and of course here you can take with the rook, planning to double rooks in the f-file, putting some pressure on f7, but I chose bishop takes f4 instead. Knight came to e6, and I retreated the bishop to g3 because from here it supports a possible e5 for me. He played queen g5, threatening the bishop. I defended it and would not allow a queen exchange at this point. He came back to e7, and then I played e5. And of course the main idea of the move e5 is to give my knight the very nice square e4, from where it could in some lines go to d6, which would be very good for white. And also it blocks the black bishop on g7. He went knight d4 because he also has to develop his bishop. I went queen d2 and knight f5, and now my bishop came back to f2, and now bishop takes e5 is not an option really, because it becomes very dangerous for black after rook a to e1. He can take here with check. He can go bishop e6, but then knight e4, b6. This is a possible line. g4, knight back to d6, and then taking here, and bishop g3. And this is well, it is perhaps playable, I don't know, but I think the white position looks quite strong. Very active pieces. The king is still in the center. Queen is threatened here. Well, better position for white, I would say. So he didn't take on e5. Instead he played bishop e6 as planned, and I went knight f3. And it may not be something special right now, but I like the white position anyway, because there are some very nice ideas. g4 in some lines would catch the knight on f5, because the black pieces are developed somewhat strangely. And also, of course, this knight e4, knight d6 is always a possibility. And also a4, start playing an attack on the black queenside pawns. So there are many possibilities for white. It's quite flexible for him, while it's difficult for black to find some good plans. Here I thought that of course knight e4 is coming sooner or later, and therefore the pawn on c5 is under pressure. And I thought perhaps c4 here could be a possibility. But then comes knight e4, and now there's still this g4 threat catching the knight. So if, for example, c takes d3 here, then simply by g4, and the knight is lost. So if he tries to free up a square for the knight by playing h5, then d takes c4, bishop takes, knight d6 check, knight takes, e takes, queen d7, bishop g4, and this is also better for white, because now if bishop takes, then simply queen takes, and a double attack on the rook and the bishop. And if he castles, well, then bishop takes, and then the check with double attack. So this doesn't work. So it may be that he has to defend this this c5 pawn with b6, and that's what he played. I played knight e4, and with castling queenside, black finally finishes his development, but unfortunately for him, his king position is not very solid, and the advanced pawns on the queen side is making them an easy target for white's pawn. And I think in this position there is no time to waste. I would have to go a4 immediately. He goes bishop d5, which is very logical, threatening the pawn on e5, and I went rook f to e1. He took the pawn. I took the bishop, the strong bishop. He gives up now, but he's getting a pawn for it, and what else to do? And now I considered knight takes c5 here with a discovered attack on the queen. Can go back to f6, and after, for example, knight back to e4, then he can take. Rook takes, and he can take on b2. And I don't think that would be in white's interest. So instead, simply a5, attacking the black king position immediately, creating more weaknesses on the queen side. Bishop takes e4, a takes b6, a takes b6, and now of course not rook takes e4 here, then queen takes, and there's a pin in the d file. That would not be good. So instead, the very good b4 instead, because now he cannot really play c4 here, because bishop takes b6, and he cannot really take on b4 because of bishop takes b6. So he had to go knight d4, I think, and then b takes c5, b takes c5, and then I played my queen back to d1, from where it could go to b3, possibly also give a check on g4. And if knight e6 here, for example, well, then rook a8 check, king b7, rook a4, and there's problems in the a and b files. The black king is very vulnerable here. Instead, he went knight b5, knight b5. I chased it away with c4, and he came back to c7, and then rook a7. And now, again, a rook is starting to dominate the black king position. He played f5 to protect the bishop, which still not can't be taken because of the pin in the d file. So now came the planned queen b3. And if, for example, here rook h to e8, a move like this, then queen b7, king d7, d takes e4. Now the d file is open for a rook. He has to go back here. He has to defend the knight on c7 still. e5, rook takes. Then we can make a mask exchange here and be up a bishop and have a winning position. So the only move here is the one that my opponent played in the game. He played rook takes d3. I took with the queen. He took my queen, and now so we have a lot of exchanges here. He went rook h7 to defend the knight on c7, which cannot really move. b5 and d5 squares are not available to the poor knight there. And now rook takes the pawn on c5, and now we have a position where I have a rook for a knight and a pawn. So materially, it's not because there's so much in it, but white has very active pieces, and the black king is still vulnerable, and the black knight is pinned to the rook and could possibly be pinned to the king as well at some point, as we shall see in the game. Bishop e4 came, doubling rooks in a5, rook d7, and then came bishop b6. And if the knight goes here, let's say knight e8, then rook check, and simply the bishop back here, and there's a checkmate. He cannot really prevent a checkmate. And if he goes something like bishop d3 instead, c5, bishop e4, some nothing moves, then exchange here could be a good idea, because then I can simply play rook a7, and when he goes back here, I can go over here and plan rook f6, and beginning to grab some pawns and have a winning position. So in so now exchanges on c7 is a possibility already. So he went c5, opening up for bishop b7, and I took the pawn, and now the poor knight is pinned all over the place here, and he went bishop b7 as planned. And again, it's probably possible to exchange on c7 and win the game. Bishop takes, rook takes, king takes, c5, king c6, and then king f2. He cannot go with the bishop, because then I will go and grab some pawns here, and if he doesn't move the bishop, he cannot take the pawn because the bishop is hanging, and he cannot really move. And I will start moving my king towards the center and perhaps on the king side. So it should be winning, but you have to be a little bit careful. So instead I played rook a3, and he played f4. But now the pawn ending is much more easy to win, because now this f4 pawn is not defended. And now it's really simple. So now I simply took on c7. And then I could play rook a7. And now the plan is, of course, to take on b7, and then play king f2, grab pawns, and if he tries to defend, then I can support my c pawn perhaps. Yeah, it's simply just winning. I would know if he defends f4, then I would simply go down and take him here. Yeah, I can win somehow. So my opponent resigned here, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you on my chess website at klausjensen.com. Bye bye for now.